Hello. Welcome to those of you watching, and welcome to our panelists. This event is being recorded. I'm Becky Simon with the League of Women Voters of Naperville. League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose candidates for public office. Rather, we believe that a well-informed voter is best able to make their own decision at the ballot box. League of Women Voters of Naperville is producing this candidate forum in partnership with our sister league, the League of Women Voters of the Aurora area. Now I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, Carol Tidwell. Carol?
Thanks, Becky. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our forum tonight for Illinois House District 97. Our candidates are candidate Batnick and candidate Benton. Thanks to everyone who is watching our recording tonight. As Becky said, my name is Carol Tidwell. I'm a longtime League member and a moderator who has been trained by the League to conduct candidate forums. I do not live or vote in the 97th House District. Thanks especially to the candidates for participating tonight. Without them, of course, we could not have these forums. We are following League rules tonight for the forum, to which the candidates have agreed. We will ask questions from the list we have prepared. These were not given to the candidates ahead of time. We solicited questions from our members and from the community. The candidates will each have 2 minutes to present an opening statement in turn alphabetically. They will have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question in turn. I will alternate which candidate answers first, beginning alphabetically. At the end of the forum, they will each have 2 minutes, also alphabetically, to make a closing statement. Our timekeeper will keep us all on track in the interest of time and fairness to both candidates. The screen will show a warning at 1 minute, 30 seconds, and then at 15 seconds, the candidate who is speaking should begin to wind down and then stop speaking when the stop sign appears. As per our forum rules, the candidates will not use their cell phones or other electronic devices during the forum as an aid to answering questions. Thank you again to the candidates and also to the viewers of this recording for adjusting to this way of conducting a candidate forum during the current pandemic. Doing things a new way does not always come easy, and we appreciate everyone's indulgence. All right, if the candidates will unmute, please, and come onto the screen, we will get started. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. All right. Candidate Batnick, your opening statement, please. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be with you today. Sorry we can't be there in person. You know, we are kind of seeing a breakdown in the civility of politics these days. We're certainly seeing it at the national level. And we hear from a lot of people that they want to hear more about solutions. They want people to compromise. They want people to fix problems. They want their representatives to work for the people. And when you look at my record, that's exactly what I've done. I've offered creative solutions. I've been willing to call out my own party when they've been wrong. I've been willing to, you know, stand up to some of the most powerful interests in the state when I've disagreed with them. And, you know, as we go through the day, I think go through the evening here, I think you're gonna find that we're gonna talk about a lot of things where I've done the things that everybody is so much yearning for these days, where I've broken with my party, or I've stood with my party, whatever I believed, and done the right thing. So I look forward to the debate this evening, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Benton?
Yeah, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this on. And my name's Harry Benton. I'm running for the 97th District. I live in Plainfield. I'm a husband, a father, an iron worker, and been an active member of the community. I'm also a trustee in the Village of Plainfield. I've been very active within my homeowners association since I moved in. I'm active within the community through Dollars Against Diabetes, which is for research for juvenile diabetes. Also, board member, board of director for Veterans Outreach of Illinois. And the reason why I decided to run is because I wanted to make sure that everyone was represented, not just a small group, but everyone at a bipartisan level. And property taxes are getting out of control. We have healthcare costs that are out of control for many. And we need to start working on innovative solutions to work on job placement opportunities for a lot of our youth. And going forward, we need to make sure that we are cohesive as a community and there's good representation across the board. So I just want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this on.
Thank you. All right, we'll get started with the questions. The first one will go to you first, Candidate Batnick. And let me say that if at any time during the questions, if you need me to repeat one, I'm happy to do that. Just let me know.
Okay.
All right, the first question, Candidate Batnick, who is your political mentor or role model?
Wow, I have a few, but I would say that the one that comes to mind right away is former Senator Peter Fitzgerald. And one of his famous lines, if you don't remember him, was there was going to be an earmark at the federal level for a Lincoln Library in Springfield. And he said, I don't mind the people of Illinois getting a $50 million library. I just don't want them to pay $150 million for it. He was an independent thinker. He wanted efficient government. He wanted things done. He wanted things done well. He was willing to break with his own party, but he was also willing to stand up with his beliefs, and he kept those beliefs consistent through. And I think it's important that as I see so many situations where when one party is doing something, they call it out, but when their own party is doing something else, they don't, and then the reverse. Pensions is a perfect example. So when we were dealing with the pension crisis under Governor Quinn, the Republicans would say, hey, the assumed actuarial rates are too high. We're never going to achieve that. We need to pump more money into it. And then and the Democrats would say the opposite. And then as soon as Rauner became governor, everybody flipped the script and did the other thing. We have to look at these big issues, not like a political football. We actually have to solve them. Say what you believe and stick with what you believe. And that's one of the things that I certainly appreciated about the senator.
Thank you. Candidate Benton, the first question to you.
Yeah, so one of my role models was always my father, because my father would help out anybody. He would take us out of school and work in soup kitchens to learn what was going on in the real world. He would also take homeless people off the street, and we would have a meal with someone because he wanted to hear their story, and he wanted to make sure that everybody that was less fortunate was fed. And I know he's not a political figure, but he's always driven me further from a political figure. I've always liked the philosophy that George Washington had with the separation of parties. He always wanted to make sure that the party system never got in the way, and it was just good and ethical government. So that goes back to working across the aisle to make sure that you're doing the right things and making sure that you're doing what's best for the people who elect you.
Thank you. All right, Candidate Benton, the next question goes to you first. And it is this: if you are elected, would you vote to extend the expansion of voting by mail in Illinois beyond this election cycle?
Yes, I think we need to make sure that everyone has access to voting and make sure that their voice is heard. Vote by mail is an effective way to vote. We've seen here in Will County in 2016, it was 27,000 ballots were mailed out. Now we have over 100,000. People are having more and more ways to vote, and we need to start looking at progressive ways to give people their ballots. And I think it is a good way going forward. So yes, I completely support the expansion of vote by mail.
Candidate Batnick, to you.
So we had a robust vote by mail system. I don't know really what we did.
Okay, just a minute now. We've lost your audio. Candidate Batnick, we've lost your audio. We have lost your audio, and now we've lost your video.
Okay, can you hear me now? I want to.
We can hear you, yes, but we can't. Now we can do both.
Okay, sorry about that. I like voting by mail. I think it's a great way to vote. Anybody can order an absentee ballot. You can sit at your home computer and review things. And a lot of times people go into the ballot box and they don't know who to vote for judge, for example, and they can sit and research who to vote for judge. Some of the issues that I had this election is they cherry picked who was going to receive the ballot. So they went back and said, we're only going to send ballots to people that voted back through the 2018 election, which was obviously a Democratic wave election. They're also doing things where there's 40 days to vote early in some locations and only 2 weeks in other locations. So I think we really need to standardize that. I support a strong, safe, fair vote by mail system. That's not what we did. Government resources were used to encourage certain people to vote, not necessarily everybody to vote. The other issue that we have with what happened this last election is what people don't realize is when you move out of state, you're actually supposed to tell the local voting authority that you moved. So what happened was we mailed out ballot applications to people that haven't lived in the state for years. And that's not safe. That's just not the right way to do it. So there's a solution here. You got to keep the rolls clean. I certainly appreciate vote by mail, but we have to do it properly and keep it safe.
Thank you. And the next question comes to you first, Candidate Batnick. COVID is an ongoing issue. Illinois reduced infections and the mortality rate, but the numbers are now rising. What is your stance on mask wearing and social distancing? And do you support the metrics and regional approach being used in Illinois?
So this is an easy one for me because I was the first one to call for use of masks privately with the governor in March, publicly mid-April in an open letter. Using masks is the simplest, easiest, most affordable way to keep the virus at bay. So I've strongly supported it. And this is one of the examples that I talked about in my opening about breaking with my party. I took a lot of heat from my party. I broke with the president on this for standing up and saying we need to do masks. Now, when I called for masks, it wasn't a partisan issue. Somehow it became a partisan issue. It was, in my opinion, the creative solution because I did my homework, and that's what I do. I did my homework, and I realized that, the way to get as much of the economy going again as you could, the way to really attack the virus is to do the mask wearing. Now, if you look at it, we instituted that rule May 1st, and that's really where we peaked and started to come down was after we instituted the mask wearing. On the regionalization, yeah, absolutely. I support a regionalization approach. There are little quirks that I've things that I would change in the way some of the metrics are used. We're the only state I know of that actually double counts cases. If you're trying to get back to work and you test and test again, I actually think we can lower the threshold, but then only count a case once within a certain time period. So there's some nibbling around the edges that we can do, and I've given those ideas to the administration. But I certainly support the mask wearing. Was the first one in the state to come out for it, public official, and certainly support the social distancing and and the metrics.
Thank you. Candidate Benton.
Yeah, I always want to follow what the science is and follow with the mask wearing and lead with the epidemiologists and the scientists. And in the village of Plainfield, I wanted to make sure that some of the events were shut down because we didn't have people wearing masks. It wasn't being enforced. We had too many people that were right on top of each other and not socially distanced. So I want to get us back on track. And by getting us back on track, that's following the science. And the metrics, yes, the regional metrics are good. One of the downsides to that is if you have a certain community that's not following the IDPH guidelines and it's penalizing other people within that region, So we need to look at that on repeat offenders because we have a neighboring town that is consistently seeing higher numbers because they aren't enforcing the IDPH guidelines. So we need to make sure that it's fair and equitable going forward, but I support mass and I support the efforts that are going at the state level and what the governor is doing to try to keep everyone safe. Been out knocking doors and talking to people, and they are feeling the same exact way as well.
Thank you. You are first, Candidate Benton, for the next question, and it is this. There has been talk about changing state law to make pension benefits taxable above a certain level. Would you support doing this?
No, I don't want to see a taxable retirement income because there are many that are going into a fixed income and they don't have a lot in savings because unfortunately with COVID and other issues that we've seen people dive into their savings. We have small business owners that are struggling right now. So I want to make sure that retirement income is not taxed, especially with the rising cost of healthcare. We have seniors that are struggling going to food banks because they can't afford their prescription drugs. And we have others that can't afford the cost of property taxes. We don't need to add an additional burden of putting a tax on a retirement because that roughly 5% could be make or break of putting a meal on the table. So no, I am against taxing the retirement income.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick.
No, I don't support taxing retirement. I'll leave it at that. Just a bad idea. I hope you have extra questions because I gave you an extra couple minutes. So
We're always
apparently we're not talking over each other like last night.
We're always happy when people take less than their full 2 minutes because we get more questions in that way. I think I have 150 here, so I hope you're ready. Okay, the next question to you then. Candidate Batnick, what is your view on the fair tax amendment proposal that is on the November 3rd ballot?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit longer than the last question. I did not vote for putting it on the ballot, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one of our biggest issues is our crushing pension debt, and from skipping payments in the past, and it's like a credit card debt with a high interest payment, essentially because you expect about a 7.25% return on your pension funds. The money that isn't there, it's kind of like you have a credit card debt with the 7+% interest, which is unbelievable when you think about where interest rates are right now. And they only want to use 5% of the new funds to go towards that pension debt. And you can find this video on my Facebook page, one of my websites. That's like adding $1.67 to a $13,000 credit card bill per month. It's not really addressing the overwhelming issue. And we've seen our spending increase much higher than population and inflation. And there's way too much waste and corruption in government for me to say, you know what, we need more, the state deserves more money. Now, the argument is they're going to say that for now, some of the lower income earners are going to see $50 to $150 less in taxes. The issue is none of the analysis that I've seen, and I asked the speaker this directly once during the debate on the floor, what happens when that high income earner, a billionaire, has the ability to just relocate to Florida, and he takes tens of millions of dollars of taxes with him, but he also takes a lot of his workers with him, and he takes his business with him. That hurts the lower income workers. So then what happens is the rates have to get tweaked on everybody else to make up for the people leaving. We have too many people leaving the state. We don't need job creators leaving the state. We need more job creators coming into the state. So I did not vote to put it on the ballot.
Candidate Benton, the question to you now.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is roughly 97% of people will see either the same or a lower tax rate. It's endorsed by a lot of nonprofit organizations and a lot of organizations across the board. We also have AARP that's endorsing it. What it comes down to is I want to make sure that it's right for everyone's family. I don't want to see the middle class, or I don't want to see politicians having carte blanche to just raise taxes whenever they want. I also don't want to see, like the earlier question, retirement income being taxed on a vulnerable population. So I'm glad this is actually in the hands of the people to vote on it rather than in the hands of the politicians. And I hope they vote well.
Thank you. Candidate Benton, the next question comes to you first, and it's this. Education funding in Illinois has been a subject of concern and debate for decades. What is your plan to provide high-quality education to the children of Illinois?
Well, we need to start looking at the way that it's funded, and we have to start going back to those metrics. We also have to go through our budget and go line by line and start doing audits and start seeing where we have wasteful spending, and we can start shifting money to education, because we all know education is one of the best investments that you can make. For every dollar you put into education, you could see a $5 to $10 return. One of the programs that I'm also pushing is trade and vocational initiative programs. That way we can start creating more opportunities for these kids coming out of school. Not everyone has to go directly into college. If you want to go ahead and have a different opportunity to get your career started a little bit sooner, you can go to trade and vocational. But we have to find a way to fund those programs too, because everything is tested based on funding. So we're creating a lot of test takers, and everything. Education shouldn't be so cookie cutter. We need to make sure that those elective programs are funded, and we can look at having apprenticeship coordinators and apprenticeship instructors going in to volunteer their time and start getting kids excited about that. We also have to make sure that there's funding for IEP programs, but we have to look at our budgets and make sure that we can shift that. And we also need to find a way to push money around to lower income. That way we can build up our population that's struggling the most to create productive members of society and give everybody opportunities, equal opportunities. But I don't want to keep shifting everything back as a burden onto the taxpayers. We need to find a way to fund this differently, and we need to possibly look at consolidation programs where we can consolidate unnecessary taxing bodies and unnecessary levels of government as well.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, that question to you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I had to get I'm getting my son off the internet, gaming. Hopefully that helps with the connection. Look, this is another one of those situations. One of the unique things that I bring to the table, I did it on pensions with my lump sum optional buyout, and there's something I'm working with a group of legislators on both sides on education funding. Number one, I was one of the Democrats that led the charge on the change of the funding formula for education. We really had this have-not system, which we still have. But one of our biggest issues, and something that the state of Minnesota actually does, is they share their commercial property tax base statewide, which levels things out. You know, there's a school district just outside of the representative district here that spends $30,000 per student because they have so much industry and so few students there. And then you have school districts that spend, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 per student. Or you'll have a situation where you'll have, let's say these are two school districts. If the nuclear power plant goes here, this district gets a ton of money and is overfunded, and this district is struggling. And the commercial base doesn't work the same way the residential base does in terms, something like a nuclear power plant is a draw for the area. It's not based on these cookie cutter lines. And you have a situation now where it actually makes more sense for Amazon to build a warehouse in some place like Naperville versus the south suburbs or East St. Louis, because the property tax rates are so much different when it shouldn't be that way. So coming up with a plan to share the commercial property tax base is a unique solution, on top of the fact that we are marching towards that new funding formula that we passed, I want to say 3-4 years ago. That was certainly a good start.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, you are first for the next question, which is this. Gun violence is a real issue in Illinois. What is your plan to reduce the violence that takes the lives and livelihoods of innocent Illinoisans?
Yeah, there was a gun dealer licensing bill that passed that could have been a better bill, and there's been there's been some legislation that's been, sometimes we've actually tried to pass legislation that's in the name of somebody who lost their life, yet the facts around that case don't match up with what's happening. So with gun dealer licensing, what we should do is really go after the bad actors. So instead of trying to focus all of our efforts on every dealer, we should have a mechanism that kicks in where our efforts are laser focused on the dealers who have guns that are showing up at crime scenes. One of the other issues are guns are being brought in from other states. We're going to have to look for help on that as a federal issue. But the last thing is the officer who was shot at the Thompson Center was shot by somebody who had multiple violent crimes, who was arrested at a scene with a gun that had the serial number shaved off of it or filed off of it, was wearing Kevlar. He should not be on the streets. We need stronger sentencing for repeat gun violators. We can't have this weak system that lets so many violent offenders back out onto the street.
Thank you. Candidate Benton, that question to you now.
Yeah, so I'm a responsible gun owner, and I've seen terrible gun practices on a regular basis while actually being at a gun range. And we don't have a training. We don't have a training before your first-time gun buyer. So you would need to make sure that a first-time gun owner knows how to handle that gun, knows how to properly store that gun, so nobody ends up getting hurt. A lot of times you see cases where a child was hurt or somebody was hurt within the household, or they ended up bringing a gun to school because it wasn't stored properly. We need to make sure that there's the proper training to store those guns. And then we also need to go in. My best friend's cousin was killed within the Henry Pratt shooting. That was a felon. That was a felon that should not have had a gun. And we need to make sure that the funding is there for the officers to go in and create a major task force so we can go in and we can get that gun out of the hands of the felon. But they're so backlogged with the officers, and that's one of the most dangerous things that they do. So they are extremely backlogged to try to go in and get that gun. So we need to come up with unique ways where we can start getting those guns out of the hands of felons. And then at a statewide level, we need to start taking our mental professionals serious. A lot of times they'll call and they'll say, we have a suicidal patient that's a gun owner. We have somebody that's a danger to themselves or others. And a lot of times that never goes anywhere. So we need to start working with our mental health professionals and making sure that those accusations or those recommendations are taken serious and they go forward. That way we can protect the general public from school shootings or public shootings or violence within the home.
Thank you. The next question is first to you, Candidate Benton, and it is this. How will you advocate for your district's fair share of funding for capital improvements?
Well, I want to make sure that every single time I go down, I'm open-minded, willing to work across the aisle and do what it takes to try to bring that funding back. We need to start looking at how our infrastructure is funded with that capital bill that passed. We need to make sure that we have the best infrastructure. We need to make sure that we're getting our fair share of grant money. It's a constant battle within the Village of Plainfield and surrounding areas to try to get that state funding and federal funding. And another way is we have to start pushing back. We are a payer state. We are a payer state and we don't get nearly as much money back as we pay in, yet we have Kentucky and some surrounding states that are seeing a dramatic amount more than what they pay out coming back in. So we need to fight for that. We need to make sure that we start cutting some of this subsidization of the southern regions, because Cook County and the Collier counties, we are not getting our fair share of money back. And you have these southern regions that are getting anywhere from $1.50 to sometimes more than $2 back for every dollar paid in, where we're seeing cents on the dollar coming back. We need to start fighting for our district. We need to start fighting for our communities because they're being left hanging high and dry and they're getting the bill.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, to you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm just doing this for clarification purposes. And I always think it's important to, you don't want to overstate or understate of the facts. He's correct that the suburbs are really paying the bulk of what's happening in the state. Really not so much the city and Cook County. And the reason it is, although they're close, I think that the math says about 80 cents on the dollar. A lot of the things that are happening downstate are actually for the benefit of the entire state. So the $700 million we give to the University of Illinois doesn't help Champaign County. That helps the entire state. So you can't really look at that metric or whether it be prisons or some of our assisted living centers or the Veterans Center out in Quincy. A lot of those things are for the benefit of the entire state. So I don't want to overstate or understate the facts, but for our district, it certainly is an issue. Being somebody that is pragmatic and being somebody, there was a project that one of the leading Democrats had in his district on the south side of Chicago, was the International Port of Chicago, and they had a debt on their books that the state wasn't going to forgive. And they didn't have to pay it unless they started making money. But the issue was they weren't going to make any money unless they could borrow money to modernize their port. So it was a chicken and egg situation. And I was one of the few Republicans, and I actually rallied conservative Republicans in the Senate to do this. I was one of the few Republicans that helped get that bill passed because it was an economic boom for the south suburbs, which helps the entire state. And building those sorts of relationships and having the trust from your colleagues that when you're pushing something, you're doing it in an honest, pragmatic way, I think matters, and I have a record of that.
Thank you. Next question is to you, Candidate Batnick. Do you believe we need to change how district maps are drawn in Illinois? If so, what would your plan look like?
So absolutely, this is a real easy one. It's been way too long of politicians picking the voters instead of the voters picking the politicians. There's a variety of plans out there that I would be fine with. One of the most unique ones that I haven't heard anybody really talk about is it's literally a mathematics splitting algorithm that it just splits the state into halves until you get the number of districts that you need based on population. So the shortest line across the state that splits the state in half, and then you keep doing that until you get the requisite number of districts. It completely takes people out of it. I really like the Iowa model, which has, it's a commission, but it requires straight lines, north, south, east, west for a certain amount of time. And then you have some bipartisan commissions that you see in other states. But some of the districts that you see, the spokes coming out of the city of Chicago, we have half of our Congress people in Will County really represent Chicago and Cook County. They don't represent Will County. You have, the districts that are connected by miles by an area as wide as a street. And that's just not good government. It needs to be nonpartisan, not even so much bipartisan. I would really prefer a nonpartisan map that has as many rules in it that's simple and easy enough to follow.
Thank you. Candidate Benton?
Yeah, I'm always going to support fair mapping because, as I've always said, I believe that everybody deserves the right to be on the ballot and has a fair shot, and may the best person win. So what we need to do is we need to look at the federal level of the way they do things and make sure that it's equitable state to state and across the nation. But we need to make sure that everyone has a voice and we don't have minority voters, black and brown, that are having a hard time trying to get to their polls because they're having issues with their mapping or they're having issues with their polling place. We need to make sure that it's equitable for everyone and everybody has that access to voting and they feel truly represented, because we need to make sure that we start moving towards a bipartisan approach in government and a more logical way of doing things. And fair mapping will end up playing into that because we can have more people truly working as independents across the aisle to get us back on track, because the state's broken. We need to start fixing it. And the thought process right now is the same thing of extreme politicians going back and forth and arguing, and little is getting done. So that fair mapping can start having an equitable solution going forward of working across the aisle and changing things in the future.
Thank you. Next question is to you, Candidate Benton. The exodus rate in Illinois is high. What steps would you take to make Illinois a destination state for both workers and employers?
Yeah, so again, that goes back to the educational opportunities. I want to start seeing a trade and vocational initiative program. That way it creates more opportunities to transition somebody into a different career. We need to start working on green energy and green jobs initiatives. That way we can have viable solutions going forward that are going to create long-term jobs for residents moving in. And I've worked on them before. I've worked on wind towers. We have nuclear power plants that we're trying to keep open that are zero carbon emissions. We need to make sure that we're working on solar energy. We have a lot of waterways that we can work on, hydroelectric dams that will start bringing and driving more people in for job opportunities. We also have to start curbing the cost of in-state tuition as well, because we're seeing a mass exodus of high school graduates that are leaving the state because it is just not affordable to go to school here in the state of Illinois. They're leaving, they're taking regional job opportunities, and a lot of times they aren't coming back. So we need to make sure that we have the best workforce. We need to work on our infrastructure and have the best infrastructure going forward, our roadways and everything else, because that's what's going to drive people in. If you have the best of the best, everybody's going to want to be here. And we also need to work on technological advances too, like data banking centers. We need to make sure that we can start moving towards more of a Silicon Valley style. Chicago has a lot of technological advances, but we just don't have that technological infrastructure. It's amazing to me that South Bend, Indiana has one of the largest data banking centers in the Chicagoland area, and Illinois does not have that. We need to start expanding and moving into the future, because if you're not progressing, you're dying.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, to you.
So I just want to follow up a little bit on the last question about fair mapping. He had mentioned about, it needs to be nationwide, and I agree. Another example of a unique solution I came up with on that was I wrote an op-ed with Kelly Cassidy, who's certainly a strong far left Democrat, on Illinois could partner with another state to do fair mapping so it's fair for the national level. So Georgia would be an example. But look, Illinois is a great state. We should be attracting people. We should be growing. We're not. We have great roads, great river, great rail. We have great schools, a great workforce. Literally, it's politicians getting in the way, and it's corruption. And to use the example, the cost of higher ed. So I lost my first two kids. I have 5 kids. First 2 went to school out of state. My oldest has permanently moved out of state. And I always thought that it was because we weren't funding higher education enough. We are so inefficient in the way we run government in Illinois that we fund higher education the 3rd highest in the nation per student. Yet our tuition rates are still some of the highest in the nation. That's what's happening across the board in government. It's not that we're not spending enough. It's that we spend it so inefficiently that the product on the other end, with everybody getting in the way in the middle and all their inefficiencies, and I can't do it in 2 minutes. I could do 20 minutes to 2 hours on higher education. There's a lot that we need to do. That's what we need to do, and get in and fix the nuts and bolts on government, get politicians on the way, use our natural advantage of our farmlands, the city of Chicago, everything else.
Thank you. Next question comes to you first, Candidate Batnick, and that is this. Marijuana and sports betting are now legal in Illinois. What regulations, if any, do you see as necessary for these new industries?
Well, they already are. They already are fairly heavily regulated. I voted for some of the medical marijuana legislation. I wasn't around for the original medical marijuana legislation. I did not vote for recreational marijuana legislation. As far as the sports books go, I think sports kind of just started. We're just seeing how this is going to work. It already is heavily regulated. I'm not sure I'm in a position yet to really say where it needs to go moving forward in the future, but it's certainly something that needs to be watched closely.
Thank you. Candidate Benton.
Yeah, so as a trustee in the Village of Plainfield, I was the only one to vote to opt in for a cannabis dispensary because I saw an opportunity to bring in tax revenue to my municipality instead of having everybody leave and go to a surrounding municipality. We need to start looking at unique ways in tax diversification, and this creates that tax diversification. And what it does is it doesn't create tax increases, it creates a voluntary tax. If you are going and you are participating in recreational cannabis, you are making a conscious decision of paying that tax to use that product. And the same thing with sports betting. But one of the things that we have to watch is we have to watch the money coming in and the money going out, because it is not federally legal to have recreational cannabis use. So it is very cash heavy, and we need to make sure that we are looking at all the money coming in and going out, because it is cash heavy. It's not going in and out of a bank, and there could be some fraud on that end, but we need to make sure that we are regulating and overseeing everything and making sure that it's done in a safe way for the recreational cannabis. And then for gaming, gaming is very, very, very heavily regulated across the country. It's very heavily regulated here in Illinois. We can always look at how we can make it better, how we can start making sure that we are doing the best practices. But right now, it's very heavily regulated, and I don't see a need to change it. But in the near future, if there is something that needs to be changed, I am all for looking at the processes and making sure that it again, is equitable for Illinois.
Thank you. Next question to you, Candidate Benton. Do you agree with the Illinois Reproductive Health Act of 2019?
Yes. Yes, I support a woman's right to choose. We need to make sure that reproductive rights are granted to every family that's out there, every woman that's out there that is between a woman and her doctor. We need to make sure that access to birth control and fertility measures are out there, and education is out there. My daughter happens to be a product of IVF and cryogenic embryo storage, so I'm very big on women's reproductive health rights. My wife also had severe endometriosis and used birth control to regulate her body. So there's multiple ways of using birth control, and it's not just birth control. So we need to make sure that everybody has access to that, and we can start seeing a better future. And again, not everyone comes from a stable household, so they don't have the same options as everybody else. So we need to make sure that the RHA is protected, especially right now at the federal level. What we're seeing is with RBG passing away, there's going to be an attack on Roe v. Wade. And I will definitely be a champion for the Reproductive Health Act to make sure that that is protected, and these rights for women are protected, and the rights of families are protected.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick?
So this is one of those topics that's been way politicized into things that it's really often not about. My personal view on this sort of legislation is that it should be done by a ballot initiative, and people should have the ability to vote on it directly. The RHA, the stuff that he had just spoke about, the RHA didn't address that. What the RHA did was put parental notice in jeopardy. So a minor child could potentially get an abortion without parental notice, which is a scary proposition because oftentimes that child may have been raped, and the perpetrator may be trying to cover up a crime, essentially. The other issue is I don't believe taxpayer funding of abortion at 8 months of pregnancy for a healthy baby is something that I would support. So that's really what that particular bill was about. Now, if that was on a ballot for people to vote on, those sorts of things, there's some things that would pass, there's some things that wouldn't pass. But I believe that people need an honest, fair discussion on this, and they should have a direct voice on some of these generational issues. This shouldn't be something that's taken out of context to mean something that it really doesn't mean.
Thank you. Next question is to you, candidate Batnick, and it is, what specific steps will you take to work in a bipartisan fashion to solve the problems in Illinois?
Well, I mean, I've already done it, and I want to expand it. So one of the first pension savings to current pensioners, because the Constitution protects pensioners, rightfully so, was an idea that I had, the lump sum optional buyout, which is scheduled to save tens of millions of dollars. It's been oversubscribed. I worked with Representative Martwick on this particular issue, and it can be expanded. And what it does, it's just an optional buyout where pensioners have the ability to take part of their annuity in a lump sum. And there's a lot of reasons why somebody would want to do that. One, you know, if you pass, you can't will a pension, but you can will a 401k or a 403b. Maybe you want to spend money while you still have your health. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you want to buy some real estate. I know, two teachers were married. They both had generous pensions. One decided to take a buyout for part of it and buy some farmland because they thought that was a great investment. So I worked with Senator, he was Representative Martwick at the time. Now he's Senator Martwick on that bill. And that's really one of the, I'm endorsed by the Illinois Retired Teachers Association because they recognize that I'm actually trying to solve these big problems. You can go back to all my work on COVID. I certainly have a track record on the really big issues. And we could talk about the small stuff, getting a street renamed or something like that. But I've been willing to take on the stuff that people call the third rail and really put myself out there on some big topics, budget, pensions, and COVID, and take some strong stands in a bipartisan way. So I do it. I did it. I'm just going to continue to do that.
Thank you. Candidate Benton?
Yeah, so I don't really care if somebody's a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter to me. Do the right thing. Be a good person. Start leading forward. Start coming up with unique and innovative solutions on how to get this state back on track. We have to, again, I said it before, we have to keep progressing because if you're not progressing, you're not growing, you're dying. We have to make sure that everybody's willing to work across the aisle because good government's like a good marriage. If you're unwilling to compromise, it's never going to work. And I'm always willing to compromise. I'm always willing to make sure everybody is represented. And that happens within the district as well. You can't just represent one part of your district or one part of the electing body. You have to represent the district as a whole. And that's what I want to do. If somebody's going to come to me with an issue that they want me to present down at Springfield, I'm going to present that in a bipartisan manner because, again, I'm a Democrat, but I believe in working across the aisle. And it's whatever it takes to get back on track. I will work with anyone. It doesn't matter. And people can scream at me all they want. They can do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. I don't easily get flustered. As long as we can get back on track, and I have a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, and it's about their future. It's about the futures of the families within the district. It's about the futures of the individuals and the families here in Illinois. I don't care who I have to work with. I want to get back on track, and I want to start moving forward.
Thank you. All right, candidate Benton, the next question goes to you first, and it is this. What is your view on term limits for the executive and legislative branches of our state government?
I'm willing to look at any legislation that's putting it forward. I'm definitely not trying to go into politics to become rich because I can make a lot more money in the private sector. I plan on treating this as a full-time job, and I think many should treat it as a full-time job. And we have to start looking at who's taking advantage of the situation. We have to start having ethics reform. We have to start having campaign finance reform. Let's start taking the money out of politics. And every time you go in that ballot box, you have an opportunity for term limits to vote somebody out. But we need to start looking at the legislation that makes sense. And we also need to start putting a moratorium on lobbying. The fact that we have all these legislators that are coming out and going straight into becoming lobbyists, and it's a pay to play, that's got to change. So across the board, I want ethics reform. Across the board, I want to start having good government again. And if that means taking a look at legislation for term limits, I am all for that, because a lot of times people make this out to be a career and they treat it as an part-time job, and that's not the way it was intended to be.
Candidate Batnick?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of term limits. I actually filed a constitutional amendment for retroactive term limits, and a lot of the reforms and ethics things are incredibly important. But what you have now is you have a situation where somebody can, if they build up that war chest, sure, technically there's term limits when people go in to vote on the ballot. But when you're in a gerrymandered district and the incumbent has $500,000 in his bank account or $1 million in his bank account, simply because he's sitting on the right committee. I mean, we have what, 2 or 3 senators and a state rep in the last year or so that have been indicted, and they broke the law. Let's be clear, they broke the law. The law didn't stop them. The one thing that could stop them from gaining too much power and influence is term limits, specifically retroactive term limits. And it's not just people at the top like Speaker Madigan or the governor or anybody like that. When you have somebody like Marty Sandoval that's head of the Transportation Committee, and he can control what happens with a red light camera bill to either pass or die, and he could just hold it in his committee, or he can control negotiations on a $1 billion capital bill, he's just flying under the radar. But he's been there so long, he has so much power, nobody dares challenges him. He has a lot of money in his campaign account. So the only way to really flip the script on everything in Illinois is term limits. So I'm a strong believer of retroactive term limits.
Thank you. Next question is to you first, Candidate Batnick. Improper use of police force, so often against people of color, has caused death and injury to many in recent years. The resulting protests have roiled communities here in Illinois, including Aurora and Naperville. What would you do, or are you doing, to address the underlying issues?
So I was actually one of the Republicans that supported the police reform bill that passed a couple of years ago. Some of the people have reached out to me with a website called 8 Can't Wait, and it's a list of police reform issues that they want passed. And the reality is some of those things have already passed. So we have a ban on chokeholds, for example, in Illinois. Now, I'm not a police officer. I'm not an expert on chokeholds, but the unfortunate incident that happened in Minnesota, I would assume because of that ban on chokeholds couldn't happen here. So when it comes to stuff like this, I want to look at it in a problem-solving way. We certainly need a better mechanism for getting bad cops off the force, but we'll go back to the education question that was asked earlier. You know, you have a lot of people that are stuck in underfunded and underperforming schools, and until we address some of those systematic issues, you have Southern Cook County with a double-digit property tax rate. So you have poor people paying higher taxes in terms of rate-wise, and then they get sent to a school that isn't funded as well. And a lot of that just feeds the cycle. So I'm certainly open to more ideas, but I supported that legislation that passed just a few years ago. And, you know, I got a couple minutes, so I'm going to add more. LaShawn Ford had we've had ridiculous stuff where I think it was in Philadelphia, I wish I had it, but where the guy ended up dying in the back of a van because he was selling onesie cigarettes. So I was one of the Republicans that broke to decriminalize that. It was a $1,000 fine, limiting it to a $50 fine. There's common sense, small things like that that absolutely need to be addressed. And I've voted for and will continue to vote for.
Thank you. Candidate Benton?
Yeah, can you repeat the question in full?
Yes, I can. Improper use of police force, so often against people of color, has caused death or injury to many in recent years. The resulting protests have roiled communities here in Illinois, including Aurora and Naperville. What would you or are you doing to address the underlying issues?
Yeah, so I'm all in support of looking at some possible reforms where everybody has a seat at the table. We need the communities of color sitting right there with the police officers. That way we make sure that there is respect from the communities, respect from the officers, and we start coming up with a unique solution. And all the ideas are coming into play so everybody has a voice. The other thing that we need to do is we need to start taking a look at some of the laws on how we hold some of these bad officers accountable, because nobody hates a bad officer more than a good officer. And I've recently talked to a person of color, a Black attorney that has represented a municipality for the police department. And we've gone back and forth and we've had a conversation on what is common sense reform, or possible ways that we can have better education, possible ways that we can start educating the communities as well. I'm willing to work with anyone. I've also talked to my neighbor who happens to be a person of color and a chief of police and works within a Black community, and bounced ideas back and forth off of their family as well, to make sure that we have a solution that's good for everyone. The police officers do a very difficult job, and we need to make sure that they go home safely. And in the village of Plainfield, I also voted for body cameras because it protects the general public. It also protects the officers. It was pushed by the chief of police, and we banned strangleholds before it was even a thing in the state. That was before me, but we need to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table going forward, so everyone's voice is heard on both sides.
Thank you. And the last question goes to you first, Candidate Benton. Do you believe that the LGBTQ community has adequate protections under law?
No. So we have the LGBTQ plus community that has a higher suicide rate. We also have LGBTQ plus, the entire community is somewhere around 5 to 10 times more likely to run into abuse by a police officer, because a lot of that comes down to a lack of education or a lack of training within the community. So that has to be equitable as well. We need to make sure that the LGBTQ plus community is working on training to make sure that they are not harassed within the law enforcement world as well. But, you know, I always go back to being a good person and being a good, the way I was raised within the Catholic Church is everybody deserves the right to happiness and freedoms, no matter where you come from, no matter where your financial background is, the color of your skin, or your sexual orientation. We need to make sure that people feel comfortable within their own community. They can go out after dark, they can walk down the street, they're not harassed by people. They need to make sure that they're safe walking down the street and they're not going to be harassed by the general public. We need to start working on the reforms to make sure that the community feels safe, whether it's in daylight or at dark or at the local grocery store or at their school. It doesn't matter where they're at. Everybody deserves the right to happiness, freedom, and to feel safe in their own skin, in their own community.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, to you.
Well, I'm following the rules. I wish I could go onto my computer and look up a bill that I support. So what was shocking to me was the state of Illinois had, and I wanted to see if the governor, if this made it back to the governor for a signature, we had a minimum number of employees that were required for human rights discrimination to kick in. So I believe at the federal level, it's 15. And I didn't know, I don't think there should be I don't care what size your business is, whether it be 1, 2, 50, or 100, you deserve the same protections. And that was a Will Guzzardi bill. Once again, he's certainly not a far right conservative. Will is more to the extreme left. But I talk to him a lot, and I say, you know, sometimes the far left meets.
We've lost your audio, candidate Batnick, and also your video.
I think I got you now.
Welcome back, and the timer will be sure you get your full time.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where I left off. I'll try to speed it up. I was one of 2 or 3 Republicans to vote for the lowering the human rights threshold from 15 employees down to 1. It shouldn't matter how many employees you have for that to be the law. I'm not sure if that made it back around for the governor's signature. But you know, I've put the votes on the things that address those situations, and I will, if that bill didn't become law, I would certainly vote for it again. Once again, it's a situation where I can show, hey, I did the right thing. I broke with my party. I did what I believed was the right thing to do.
Thank you. Candidate Batnick, please give your your closing statement, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take that long. Hopefully my internet will stay long enough. You know, I heard a bunch of times tonight the phrase, we need to come up with unique solutions. We need to come up with unique solutions. The only unique solutions I've heard tonight were from me. Ideas on leveling out the playing field on education, my work on pensions, my work on COVID, my suggestions on gun deal licensing. I bring a unique perspective that isn't along party lines in terms of solving problems. It's what I like to do. It's what I've done. I have a record of doing it. I have a record of even though I'm in the minority, injecting ideas into the bloodstream down in Springfield to get good initiative done, and that's why I deserve to be reelected. Thank you. Thank you for all your time, everybody.
Candidate Benton, your closing statement, please.
Yeah. So we have to come up with unique solutions. We can't just keep having the same people doing the same thing over and over. And also, you know, my opponent is the Republican floor leader. His very definition is to kill Democratic bills on the floor. So how can you call yourself bipartisan and coming up with unique solutions? You consistently kill things on the floor. So going forward, what I want to do is I want to work at a bipartisan level, work across the aisle, start working on better access to affordable health care, make sure that we have more affordable education and better educational opportunities for everyone that even doesn't want to go to college. If they want to go into a trade or vocational program, we can make sure that that's equitable for them. We need to make sure that we can start coming up with more solutions to make income and property tax a real relief program, so we stop seeing more people leaving, and we need to start putting that money back in the pockets of families because we need tax diversification. We need to start expanding our local municipalities by putting money back into our pockets, because a dollar in your pocket could lead to $500 worth of local economic stimulation and growth to help lower taxes. And I just want to represent the district as a whole for everyone inclusive, and make sure that everybody has the right to happiness, health, and freedoms.
Thank you. Well, that ends our forum tonight. We have people to thank, of course. First of all, the candidates for your participation. Without your willingness to put yourself out there, we would not hold these forums. And also, of course, the hardworking members of the Naperville and Aurora area League of Women Voters chapter who put this forum together. And now to our viewers. Early voting began September 24th. Early voting sites have extended hours to hopefully prevent long lines from forming so that in-person voting will be safe. If you choose to vote by mail, please be sure to follow all instructions and mail your ballot no later than mid-October. If your election authority has a secure drop box for ballots, please consider using that. But however you do it, please be sure to vote. It is your voice in our democracy. Thank you, and good night to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You bet.